All right, we are live from Laguna Beach today in our I Own It studios. We're back in our studios, and today's guest is exceptionally special that everyone's going to enjoy. So buckle up because it's going to be fun. This gentleman he's a former chiropractor, but he's a doctor. He's an expert into cellular healing. And it's a topic that most people don't talk about, but we're going to share a little bit of insight on what he does and who he is. And he'll share a lot of his knowledge. So enjoy it. It's going to be fantastic. And Dr. Daniel Pompa, welcome to the I Own It show. We had you on the show because we know you own it. So thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having me, Ben. Well, at least I own this space.
That's all you need is to create your own space. Um, so you have a very powerful personal story. It's one that I gravitate to. Uh, it's of an unknown sickness becoming your own doctor and then recovery. Could you share more about your personal journey and how you transform this unexpected struggle into your life mission?
Yeah, pain to purpose. That's my story. I didn't choose it. Unfortunately, it chose me. But, I guess sometimes it's good to start with the victory in the end. I train doctors all over the world and, you know, teach people all over the world. All of that came out of this story. So there's a victory. Let's start there. Yeah. So look, it was around 1999 and I had a busy practice. I had two young boys at the time, one of which and both. But I was training. Arguably, I was in the best shape of my life, and then fatigue started. So, like most athletes, you're thinking I'm just overtraining. I'm working this practice. I'm doing a lot here. I'm training. I cut back on my training load, and wasn't changing this fatigue. And then it went to like debilitating, debilitating fatigue, but then kind of layered with anxiety. Then it was I couldn't sleep. I either couldn't get to sleep, wake up in the middle of the night, couldn't get back to sleep. Then it went to like really bizarre symptoms, so panic attacks. I mean, just crazy stuff going on. I couldn't handle any stress at all. Crying babies, nothing. Right. I literally got to the point where I was hiding it from most people because I was kind of embarrassed. I was the healthy guy, all of a sudden not. And I would come into my office and just work on people and just lay down in between and look for reasons to cancel things. Yeah, I mean, I was trying to make an abnormal situation normal. That wasn't working, wasn't show up to family functions anymore. It got really bizarre. It got really crazy. But eventually, after, I don't know, it was probably almost 3 years, figured things out. And again, everything I teach today come out of what I figured out. Even the stuff that I ran after, I needed to know that didn't work. Meaning, my thyroid, no doubt, was not functioning correctly. My hair was thinning. I was losing muscle, belly fat. Never had that before. I call that skinny fat. And I couldn't, like I said, adapt to any stress. So I knew my adrenals were fried too. But when I would go in for blood work, it would be normal, which is very frustrating. However, my body temperature was really low. So I knew that my thyroid function, my adrenal function wasn't right, which was throwing off all my hormones. Frankly, I was a hormonal mess. It really was. But I was downstream for many years playing around with the thyroids and the adrenals, only to realize it was too far downstream from where the real problem was. At one point, Ben, I focused in on the control tower sits in the middle of the brain. I don't want to get too sciencey, but it's pituitary hypothalamus. It's the hypothalamus kind of takes in all the information from the body hormonally, and then the pituitary kind of then directs the new commands from that. So I knew there was something wrong there because I couldn't play this hormone game downstream. It just wasn't working. So I knew the information coming in and coming out of the control tower was off. But every time I would try to help that, and I did a lot of research here, I would get really mad. Like it seemed like I would get like even more anxiety. So I went for a while just not knowing what was wrong. And then one day I was doing my searching around and I found Mad Hatter's disease. Do you remember what that is? So
Yes.
Yeah, people make, well, if you saw Alice in Wonderland, you have a
Mhm.
little aspect, right? So they were mad as a hatter. People
That's right.
listening, watching can relate to that. But I was mad as a hatter. I had all the symptoms. I really did, including bizarre, unexplainable anger and irritability, horribly. And so, if you know anything about Mad Hatters, they were mercury poisoned. They were using mercury to attenuate molds and bacteria in the felt hats that they were making. And I went and got a blood test. As a matter of fact, that day I went to the best head of toxicology at Allegheny General Hospital in Pittsburgh, and $5,000 of blood work, which I didn't have insurance, so it was hard. Through this process, by the way, we remortgaged our home. We went, absolute in the dirt. But the blood work, so praying that it would come back with something. It came back like as normal as, I think his comment was, man, your blood work looks better than mine, right? It was like, honestly, that was not what I wanted to hear. It wasn't. If they'd have told me you have cancer, I would have been like, okay, good, because at least now know what I'm up against and fighting. I mean, they're going to live or die, because my fear wasn't death. My fear was living life like it was. I
Mhm.
couldn't live it like that anymore. But anyways, mercury was normal, all that. It was like another year later. I made friends with a endocrinologist. I read his books because I knew this thyroid thing, all of it was off. And he said to me, Dan, I think you have mercury toxicity. And I said, I thought so too. I did a blood test. He said, wrong test. Try it this way. And lo and behold, a lot of heavy metal issues showed up. And so I said, in particular, mercury. And so I was right on that. But I said, where do you think I got it from? He said, do you have any dental work around the time this happened? And I said, maybe. Anyways, fast forward, that was it. Mercury, as I found out, these silver fillings that so many of us had or have contain 50% mercury, vaporizes, crosses the blood-brain barrier, and in studies, most of it accumulates in the hypothalamus pituitary, also other parts of the brain. So I had to research on how to get the rest of these out safe and the rest of it out of my brain. Look, one of the things that I teach docs is this: always look for the perfect storm. I was also living in a low-grade moldy home, and I was
Mhm.
training at a very high level, of fitness. So physical stress training, which it is, but if you adapt to it, no problem. You get stronger, not weaker. But I was living in a low-grade mold, second stress. And then when I got these, I ended up getting 2 silver fillings out, and that just set the bucket overflowing, and boom, perfect storm. Never adapted to, stress. Bottom fell out, illness started. That was it. But here I am. I already told you the victory.
God
There you
bless
go.
you. Yeah, I feel like I need a mirror right now so I could look at myself in my mouth and be like, "What do you have, Ben, going on?" Because I eat a lot of salmon, so the joke with family and colleagues are you're going to get mercury poison, and so it's interesting that we're
Well,
talking
look, I
about
mean,
this.
if you're eating wild caught salmon,
Right,
there's mercury there, but it's a lower level. These fillings vaporize mercury
right, right.
24/7. Look, you Google the smoking tooth video. That's
Hmm.
a 25-year-old filling, and they hit it with an eraser like you would, right? And you see mercury vapor pouring
Mm-hmm.
off. Forget about hot liquids. These leach the reason they chose a 25-year-old filling, because the 88 at one point was saying, the mercury's out. Well, first they said it doesn't release mercury. And they couldn't say that anymore. Then they said this is too small to matter. Then they said, yeah, but the old fillings, it's gone anyway. It simply wasn't true. These fillings are outlawed in most countries, except still here in the United States. Believe it or not, they still put them in. And unfortunately, probably more poor people, sections of town, they're still utilizing silver fillings, which is unfortunate. But here's the other unfortunate part. Look, if your mother had silver fillings, which I would almost guarantee all of our mothers did, there's a
Mm-hmm.
study called Giraffe Study that showed the number of fillings, ladies, in mom's mouth or your mouth is proportional to how much they find in the baby's brain on autopsy studies. Okay, so very accurate. So we start with mercury in the brain, and then we start accumulating it. And there's other sources. Don't get me wrong. I wore contact lenses in the 70s, 80s, early 90s. It had mercury in a form of thimerosal in the saline solution. I ate fish. and unfortunately worse fish than you were eating. I was eating a lot of tuna when I lived at the beach for a while. I loved tuna, and I loved sushi with tuna. So I was getting large mercury sources there. Vaccines, especially back then, had mercury in it. They're putting it back in, frankly, but there's aluminum in there too, which is another brain problem. So I have had a lot of sources, and I don't get rid of it well. My bucket filled and overflowed. That was it.
Mm. So you have a wonderful, simple, effective way of explaining the science of nutrition, diet, and cellular healing, and a philosophy for approaching what you consume and how it affects your body and how you feel. But before we get into that, I think it's important for my listeners to hear your perspective from a scientific perspective. What do we really know for sure about nutrition? How it connects to your health? And the reason why I'm asking this question, I've wanted to ask you for a while, is there's so many seemingly contradictory scientific studies, especially over the last few years, which I'm sure you're aware of. Whether this gives you cancer or this does this. We A lot of folks out there just don't know what to believe anymore, and there's different fad diet recommendations. I want to start by addressing head on how you feel and how you think about uh, the scientific knowledge scientists know today and what that means for our audience in terms of how they can more clearly understand the linkage between what they put in their body and how it affects their body.
Look, if you just look at the cancer explosion that's happened, right? Every expert understands that 95% of cancer is environmental toxicities, right? Food being a big problem. There was a study done in 2012 by the senior scientist at MIT, Stephanie Senna. She showed that something else happened. When we look at what happened after World War II, we had an explosion of 80,000 chemicals, unregulated, even to this day, because they're grandfathered in, of neurotoxins in our personal care products, food, that are all around us. Okay, it devastated health. However, something else happened in 2012. Well, no, something else happened. Started in the late 90s. In 2012, her study was the first, and now there's been many. But so something happened that made all this worse. Part of this perfect storm that I'm telling you about. Something was added to our food supply that changed everything. And I'm going to talk about a few others, but this one was a game changer. This one is, if you've watched TV and you've seen, I think there's now over $2 billion given out in lawsuits because this one chemical is known to be linked to cancer. But in 2012, Stephanie showed that it also allows every toxin that we're already exposed to cross through our gut and even cross our blood-brain barrier into our brain. She linked it to this perfect rise in all these degenerative diseases that started, they were like this. And then in the late 90s, 2000s, they went up exact proportion to this one chemical. And we have a rise in autism cases. We have a rise in dementia, Alzheimer's, scary numbers. Do you realize by 2032, it's predicted that one of two kids is going to be on the autism spectrum? Right now, I'm 44. I'm doing a talk, so I know the numbers. So these are scary numbers. That's not even putting in all the learning disabilities, because that's even a bigger number. Right now, it's 1 in 5. So what happened? What this explosion that started in the 90s in childhood cancers? I mean, I could go on and on. She has shown this perfect correlation. If you Google Nancy Swanson, she is a researcher that showed these parallels. And if you go Nancy Swanson, and here's the chemical name, glyphosate. Glyphosate is used on our food for many reasons. It's an herbicide, pesticide. However, they've convinced farmers to desiccate grains. And what does that mean? You spray it on a grain before harvest, and it causes a dehydration and a shrivel, and it will increase your harvest a lot. I mean, double, and therefore its profits, right? But here's the problem. This chemical that a company called Monsanto said was safe, their own studies, all fraud. It's been shown to cause cancer and be leading to all these diseases. So, and yet it's billions have been giving out. So this isn't my opinion. This is in courts. They're winning cases. However, if you walk into Home Depot and see Roundup, that is glyphosate. It's still being used on the market. It literally is, they say it's in 60 to 70% of rainfall. That's how ubiquitous it is in the environment. We have cancer rates where we call the glyphosate alley, the Mississippi, where we're growing food and using it. And if you look at cancer rates with glyphosate, look at this whole valley, if you will, or whole, cancer alley right out, right down from the Mississippi in the northern United States. And you stunned that they're allowing this. Monsanto has a lot of money and a lot of ties into politics. So if you're wondering how this is still going on, that's why. But okay, so this has created a perfect storm of metals and other toxins and neurotoxins allowed that cross deeper into the brain and the body. So look, there's when you look at this environmental tie-in, it's unarguable, Ben. It's like if look, we used to be able to change people's diet as a physician. I can tell you this. We used to be able to change people's diet, 20 years ago and almost solve everything. I'm here to say that it's not that simple anymore. That's why my cellular detox that I've been, driving, teaching doctors for so long is so critical. Now, I'll say this. You won't get well today with a lot of these conditions that I'm referencing with just diet alone, but you won't get well without changing your diet too. We have to get this stuff out. And then here's one more thing, and I could go on, but look, there's two oils that we're all being exposed to unless you make a conscious decision to avoid them. Vegetable oil and canola oil. Ben, if you went out to dinner with me, you'll hear me say I am allergic to these because that's the only way to raise attention. And please use butter or olive oil. But the problem is most people don't realize that's all it's being used. And this stuff stays in your cells and body, not hours, not days, months. In many newer studies showing years, but not just in your body. It makes its way into your cell membranes and it drives hormonal dysfunction. It drives your cell's ability to move good things in and bad things out. So I don't care how good you eat. I don't care, what you're doing for your supplements. If you can't get those things in the cell, then you're not going to feel well. And these oils, as well as these toxic exposures, are driving something called cellular inflammation in every cell in our body. And it's why you have fatigue. It's why the brain fog and can't function and need caffeine to get through your day. Your cells are inflamed. And we know inflammation is the cause of all these diseases, but it's cellular inflammation. But then we have to ask a better question. What's driving it? You have to avoid these oils like the plague, and you better have a detox plan in place.
So avoid the oils, detox. Do you go organic like with your fruits and vegetables, or
Listen,
how
today,
do you deal with your just everyday food, your meats and vegetables that everyone's eating out
look,
there?
I know organic is 30% more, right? Whole paycheck sucks it out of you.
Especially with
Obviously some
inflation,
people,
I think it could be 50 or 60% more, Daniel.
yeah,
I
well,
think
you're
it's not
probably
cheap.
right. I'm being kind.
Right.
But okay, in some people, I just say, look, step one, Google the dirty dozen. Okay, that's like the plants that absorb more of these chemicals than any other plant. Avoid them like the plague. That doesn't cost you a nickel more. It's just taking this and take it out. If you avoid these canola oils and vegetable oils, it's not hard. It doesn't cost you any more money. You can start cooking with real butter, right? Again, like your parents probably did, right? You can start using something like avocado oil, to cook with. Those take higher temperature, a little bit better ghee. So you can exchange without increasing your financial burden, and then take it to the next step. Yes, eat all organic, right? It's like, especially when you can. Look, I think first, I know it pays for itself. You're paying now or you're paying later. But yeah, these are kind of the first steps. I have a program and I have 40 coaches that help people to do what I've been teaching for almost 20 years. I always say meet people where they are on the diet, meaning they're eating the standard American diet. I don't know what to do. Great. Stay away from the dirty dozen. Get rid of these oils, right? And where you can, eat grass-fed meat instead of grain-fed meat. Boom. Those three changes. Watch some things disappear right there.
I love that. So olive oil is okay.
Yeah,
Just
all of those,
canola.
but
Stay
be
away from
careful.
canola and vegetable.
Yeah, see, this is the other
Okay.
thing because when you go to restaurants, they're cutting the oil to save money, even fine restaurants. So you have to say allergic to because they know that their oil's been cut, right? So 100%, you know, virgin olive oil, yes, is very good. Just don't overheat it. Avocado oil works better, or almond oil works better for heat.
Hmm. So you have a simple model: fix the cell, you get well. Can you help break that down a bit further into the science of hormones and energy consumption, cell receptors, toxins, etc., and most importantly, how it connects um, to all sorts of ailments, including energy levels, brain fog, digestion issues, weight issues, hair loss? You've touched on a little bit, but can you expand on that for
Yeah,
me?
yeah, I need a circle. I feel terrible because usually I have a board here that my pen doesn't run out.
By the way, after this interview, I'm gonna have to go reassess everything. So I think that's why I need you on the show. Is I have to do a deep dive on myself afterwards.
I
But
tell you what, if people today don't do a deep dive, you're going to end up in these horrible statistics. Look, if you look at autoimmune today, let me just explain this because people, I estimate that 80% of the population at least has some autoimmune. Now you're going to be like, what do you mean? I just ran all those blood tests with my doctor. Look, testing for autoimmune is in the Stone Ages. It takes 20 years before your test goes off and you go, oh, this particular number is off, right? Indicating I have autoimmune. This means your body's own immune system is attacking itself. This happens years before you test positive. And well, Dr. Pompa, how would I know that I have this? Well, if you simply don't feel well all the time, you probably have driven inflammation to the point where your body's starting to attack different tissues. And we name autoimmune by what tissues it attacks. If we look at the thyroid explosion today, it's unbelievable, especially post-COVID, which is another topic and why it's increased dramatically. There's a reason for that, and I can talk about that. But adrenal issues, diabetes, all of these conditions. Of course, we're talking cancer rates, but we don't. What happens before you get cancer is like all of this. I just don't feel well. I have fatigue. I have hormone issues. Can't figure it out. So let's look at that because this is where it starts. This is a cell. We have 50 trillion of these in our body approximately. And on every cell, we have this membrane. This membrane is where literally life and death begins and ends. I'm going to be honest with you. This is critical. So when I talked about bad fats, these bad fats come into this membrane and integrate into it. And they disrupt everything coming in and coming out. And why out is important because in the cell has many of these little mitochondria powerhouses. I promise you, I'm not going to bore you with science, but you
no,
can.
you're not. I'm listening intently. Keep
Okay.
going.
We make ATP here. That's just energy. That's all you have to know. Okay. So, but when you make energy, if you burn wood in your fireplace, what comes off of that?
Smoke.
Smoke. Yeah, exactly. Waste. When you make energy in your cell, you're also making waste that your cell has to get rid of. It's normal. It's just what happens, right? But when this membrane is inflamed because of bad oils and specific toxins, it can't get the bad stuff out. Or not just, and we call them endotoxins, just toxins you make when you make energy. But there's other toxins that end up in there that you have to get out. And then you can't get the nutrition in. There's another problem. You asked this question as part of your question. These are hormone receptors that are on every cell in your body. What I want you all to understand is hormones only work if they actually attach to these receptors and get the message in the cell. So I drew some examples here. There's thyroid hormone, insulin, estrogen, testosterone. Of course, there's others, right? So they come in. It's like your cell phone. Your cell phone's useless unless it's able to connect to a receptor or a tower and then get its message to the next person. So what if something's blocking these receptors? Does your blood level of hormones matter? The answer is no. So when I was going to the doctor and getting my blood levels looked at and saying it's normal, it's because it would have been maybe another 10 years before my blood levels went off. But what was happening is my thyroid hormone, which normal blood levels, normal amounts, wasn't able to attach to the receptor and get its message into the mitochondria and tell the mitochondria how to use energy, how to burn fat for energy. So I was disrupting my cellular energy. I was disrupting my whole hormonal system. Oh, insulin. Okay, let me bring it home for you. You've heard of insulin resistance, type 2 diabetes. What that
Mhm.
means is you have plenty of insulin, oftentimes too much in the blood, trying to compensate. But insulin is resisted. It's resistance, can't get its message in the cell. So you end up being diagnosed with diabetes. Well, estrogen and testosterone, same thing. We don't talk about estrogen and testosterone resistance, but that's what's happening. Everyone's paying attention. Your testosterones are level, are low, your estrogen levels are low. No, what they're ignoring is it getting its message in the cell?
Mm.
Inflammation makes your cells deaf. It can't hear the hormone. So I don't care what your blood levels look like. The better question is what's driving inflammation that is creating hormone resistance? That's why you don't feel well. That's why you have brain fog. That's why you're constipated. I could go down a whole list of issues because you are hormone resistant. So the better question is what's driving it? I talked about the bad fats, but there's specific toxins that go right into this fatty membrane and are driving that. So one of the first tests we do is it's a test that literally shows and measures something called lipid peroxidation. It shows if there's inflammation of the cell. And in my program, it's like that's what we test first. Why? Because I want to know if your cells are inflamed. Because if they're inflamed, then we want to start looking upstream to the causes. And that answers your question. That's the tie-in.
Thank you for that. We're going deep, and I love it. It's this is just eye-opening information. I hope everyone's enjoying this and realizing that this is quality information. You could really reflect, look at yourself in the mirror, and say, where do I need to change? And I'm sure I'll be doing this after after this discussion. So Dr. Pompa, the nutrition industry alone is estimated at 11 plus $billion per year. I'm curious to get your perspective. Why is cellular health so rarely discussed in the mainstream? And if it's so foundational, like we just discussed, to understanding improving our health, why is it not more emphasized?
I think one of the reasons is okay, we have two issues here, right? We have allopathic medicine, we'll call that regular medicine, right? Your doctor, blah, 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 right? So allopathic medicine, they are not, the system is not set up to get to cause, all right? In its defense, it's that I have these symptoms, you go, you get put on medications for those symptoms. Maybe you need surgery, maybe you need a bone set. It works over here for that, right? Symptoms. We know though that if you're just chasing symptoms and not getting to the real reason of why you ended up with that symptom, because most symptoms, your body's alarm system saying, hey, there's something wrong. So covering them kind of works for a while and then it doesn't. But the system is only financially set up for emergency use. And if we just use it for emergency use, instead of trying to fix chronic illnesses without getting to the cause, we have a lot better statistical numbers for health in this country, but we don't. We're trying to plug chronic disease into an acute illness system. It's going to fail, right? So we don't want that. Now we have the alternative side of things that I think was years ago was really focused on cause. Now it's got into a lot of fancier testing. We call this functional medicine and genetic testing, gut testing, all these different tests. And we've kind of fell into the same trap of giving natural things for symptoms instead of saying, let's get to the cause. To answer your question, it's expensive to get to cause. Well, it's expensive not just financially, it's mentally expensive as well, meaning you're actually, as a doctor, going to have to get someone to change something in their life. That takes a lot of energy. And again, the system's not set up for it, almost on both sides. It's very difficult. we have to look at people's oral health, where so much disease starts. We have to evaluate environments where they're potentially being exposed to mold, high levels of electromagnetic frequency called EMFs, where they're potentially being exposed to volatile organic compounds that are in their home unknowingly because of the way it was built. We literally have to assess all these things. And then we have to fix the cell. And that's not an easy job. One of the things that I train my doctors is you have to teach the person the process so they can do it long enough to matter. So you see, as easy, simple as I've made the method, it's still not going to be something that you're going to ever find in mainstream medicine. At mainstream period, it's just not set up for it financially. That's the answer to the question.
So, could you share more about your philosophy around diet and nutrition and how it connects to your cellular health? Um, I'd love to hear that from you.
Well, look, I mean, when I'm training doctors or coaches, I always say control what we can control. I can't get the mercury out of your brain overnight. I can't get you out of a moldy home or fix that right away. What can we control right away? That's the diet, right? So I already brought up to you that if we can get bad oils out, right, we're going to change the cell membrane's function, right? No doubt about it. We also have to look at these carbohydrate, that we have access to a lot of sugar and carbohydrates in this modern world. Every time glucose goes up, insulin goes up. Those both, the more spikes you have through the day, the more inflammation you're driving. That's not my opinion. That's rooted in science. So if we can control glucose and insulin spikes, we can control cellular inflammation. If we can control the bad fats that we're putting, and again, bad fats. If I asked most of your listening audience, what are the bad fats? They would say saturated fat and cholesterol. I've got news for you. We're going to bust that myth amongst others in this show. The most two critical fats to stabilize that membrane are saturated fat and cholesterol. As a matter of fact, when we're dealing with very challenged children, autism cases, etc., saturated fats and cholesterol, we have to, really bring those in first to bring stabilization to the membrane. So when I say bad fats, be careful. Bad fats are rancid omega-6, but that doesn't make omega-6 fats bad. Omega-3, everyone say those are the healthy ones. They are if they're not rancid. But omega-6 are arguably more important. That's why the bad omega-6 are so bad. So we have to get good fats in here and take away bad. So diet, carbohydrates, too many glucose, insulin spikes, fats. And then I talked to you already about organic because of glyphosate and other chemicals, that make all of this inflammation even worse. So look, we have to understand that the one thing we can control is the diet. And then we can start down regulating cellular inflammation while we're working upstream to some of these toxic causes that are driving inflammation.
So I intermittent fast. Are you a fan of intermittent fasting? How do you feel about that?
Okay,
I always
so
wanted to
I
ask you
wrote a
that
book.
question.
I wrote a book called Beyond Fasting. So
Hmm.
obviously I love fasting. I've been into fasting since the 90s. So I'm dating myself a bit, but I was into it when it was me and some vegan, vegetarian people, the Natural Hygiene Society. And I was going to the seminars learning about, because I was fascinated with fasting. And I was definitely an oddball because I was a healthy meat, grass-fed meat, conventional meat, unhealthy, conventional dairy, unhealthy, real dairy and real meat, very healthy. Okay. So I didn't, fit in. However, I learned a lot about fasting. And I've been telling people for years that we're genetically are meant to fast. Without fasting, we don't get rid of bad cells. We'll explain more of that in a minute. We need fasting. However, now today, to answer your question, I'm going around reminding people that the feast is as important as the fast, meaning intermittent fasting is now caught on because, see, it works. But the problem is too much of it without feasting. The body thinks it's starving and will start to hold on to fat and eat muscle. So I go to these, and I'm invited to speak at all the big events. I see them. I see the intermittent fasters that have gravitated to one meal a day or one small one and one meal a day, and they're doing that day in, day out. What I'm teaching people to do is that to have feast days during the week. People with thyroid conditions, adrenal conditions, many women need more feast days. I put in at least one feast day a week because some people are just like, this is work. I don't want to eat.
Clarify, what is a feast day?
Thank you. I was going there. Feast day can be one of three things depending on who you are. It could be a high carb day if you've been very low carb. It could be a high protein day, or it could be more meals, because instead of eating intermittent fasting, I don't know well your audience knows this stuff. Intermittent fasting means you're fasting through the night, okay, not eating through the night, hopefully, and not eating breakfast is one example, and pushing it out to where you went 16 hours before your first meal. Maybe you didn't eat dinner, right? And then you pushed it to where you fasted from, lunch all the way through into your next meal. An intermittent fast could be anywhere between 12 hours and 24 hours. That's called daily intermittent fasting. You're pushing a meal and eating in an eating window, whether it be hours, 6 hours, 4 hours, maybe one meal. Okay. So what I teach is a process that I call diet variation, feast, famine, cycling, which means that if you do that every day, eventually your body in a restricted state feels like it's starving. So what it does to survive is it starts to go, fat is my main fuel. I'm going to hold on to that. And I would rather even break your muscle down into sugar. Look, your cells can only use two things for energy: sugar, fat. Okay. So when you are very low carb in a state like that we call ketosis, or maybe it's paleo, your cells are using mostly fat for energy. But if you're staying very strict for too long, it will want to hold the fat because that's its main fuel. It'll burn your muscle down into sugar because it can use amino acids in a process called gluconeogenesis and turn it to sugar, and then it gets what it wants. So how do we break that from happening? We feast. And we know if even just one feast day a week can keep your body from going into starvation mode and then starting to use its muscle. But thyroid, adrenal, certain hormone people, we know actually need more, sometimes 3 feast days a week. So intermittently, diet variation, feast, famine. So maybe you have one day a week where you eat one meal. Maybe it's 2 meals in a small window, right? And another day where you feast, where you eat 3 or 4 meals. And maybe one day it's just you ate higher carbs. So I'm going to draw something out for you. There's 2 pathways that we need to understand to really understand this principle. My pen just ran out. Here, this one will work. So there's a pathway called mTOR. Have you heard of that?
Mm-hmm. Sure.
Okay. And then there's a pathway called autophagy. Okay, so let's start with what we already talked about. Autophagy is what happens when you fast. Mm-hmm. Okay, this is a catabolic pathway. That means it's a pathway that eats, right? Catabolic, takes down. Anabolic, build up. Okay, so mTOR, as you're going to see, is an anabolic pathway. So that builds up, this tears down. So how are they both important? And they are. So autophagy is when you're fasting, your body is so smart, the innate intelligence that's in your body, that when you're in a fasting state for 14, 16 hours or 3 to 5 days, whatever it is, a fasted state, okay, the body needs energy. So it's smart enough not to use your good cells as energy. It breaks down bad cells. That's called autophagy, meaning it's so smart, it knows the bad DNA. It knows the more inflamed cells. We call them senescent cells, cells that live too long and just drive inflammation. You're in a fasted state via autophagy, eats those and breaks them down for energy. Here's the best part. It stimulates a stem cell and replaces it with a new cell. So part of my strategies is fasting, because we need to take people whose cells aren't working good, cellular healing, right? And get rid of the bad and make new, especially going through this process. Okay, so you see the value for this pathway. Okay, yep. So fasting or restricted food, which we call famine, or we call it partial fasting, both will put you in a state of autophagy. We'll talk about partial fasting in a minute. What is this? Now, that is stimulated by high protein. This is an anabolic state. Bodybuilders, Ben, what do they do to gain they either eat a ton of calories or ton of protein or even tons of carbohydrates, because all three of those things stimulate mTOR. Now, the vegan, vegetarian, the live longer people, right? The anti-aging people, mTOR is the enemy. mTOR ages you prematurely, right? But they're wrong. It's not the enemy. If you do bursts of times of feasting, like primitive tribes did, you drive this mTOR pathway and you heal. It's anabolic. Your joints go through this anabolic phase, like if you took steroid, and it's like, the healing occurs. However, if you stay in that pathway, meaning if you stay in a high protein diet, high calorie diet, like bodybuilders do, you will age prematurely. You will drive inflammation. Not good long term. But I argue the same problem here. Fasting too long will absolutely cause other problems. The Biosphere 2 project was a project for 2 years. They built this biosphere, and these 8 people ate perfect food, and they restricted their calories, famine state, but they did it for the 30% restriction. They did it for 2 years because the study showed that if you restrict calories, you extend your life in animal studies. So they tried it in humans for 2 years. What happened? Complete fail. They turned on this SIRT1 gene that extends life, everything that they thought would happen. But what they didn't realize is they became catabolic, too long in autophagy. Their organs shrunk, their immune systems got lower, and they looked horrible. Too much of either pathway leads to disease, but the perfect combination is magic. So what I teach is feast, famine, whether it be partial fasting or fasting. So again, looking at that weekly example, 1 day a week where you eat one meal. I do it all the time. Weekly, I have maybe 2 of those a week, but I also have at least 2 feast days a week where I either eat higher carbs than I normally eat or eat more meals than I normally eat. Sometimes I eat a lot of protein on those days, especially a hard workout. So feast, famine. I interviewed a scientist, Karen Verde, and she stumbled upon this study. She took 2 groups of mice, and they applied one group. They did different diets, low-fat diets, high-fat diets, paleo diets, multiple different diets, and they compared it to feast, famine. They compared it to 1 day of feasting, normal diet almost, 1 day of famine, 1 day of feasting, 1 day of famine. That worked better for weight loss than all of the different other diets. And I said, Karen, why do you think that is? Why did that work? And she said, because it forces adaptation, which forces a hormone optimization. So this diet variation also creates a hormone optimization because the body has to adapt to feast and famine. So that's another principle. But anyway, so I use these principles weekly, monthly, and even seasonally.
No, that's fantastic. Thank you for sharing that. So let's talk about weight loss. Could you do a deeper dive into how you approach weight loss? How do you compare your approach versus other profile diets for weight loss? Like obviously we talked about intermittent fasting, the Mediterranean diet, there's the paleo diet. There is so many diets out there. I can't get my mind around it. So
Yeah.
share that with us.
Ketosis, now there's the carnivore diet, right? Which
Right.
just eating,
Yeah, I was going to
meat and
ask you
fat.
about that. How do you feel about that? A friend of mine said red meat is really good for you. Like the studies show, like the public says it's not, but at the end of the day, red meat is supposedly, from what I hear, really good for you in your diet and to do
Yeah, well, I'm a
effectively.
big believer in 100% grass-fed, grass-finished meat, and I do
Mhm.
believe it's good for you. However, as was pointed out, staying in a carnivore diet, no culture ever did this, or plant-based diet for that matter. So I have been asked not back to some of these conferences that only are promoting one diet, right? And I'm going, no, the magic isn't any one diet. We have to emulate ancient cultures. They were forced to change their diet. Yes. Were they plant-based for periods of times? Yes, when they couldn't get prey, right, or catch. Were there times where they were absolutely eating just meat and carnivore? You better believe they were. The American Indians were forced into that many times. So yes, I am a firm believer in all the diets. But the magic is in the variation, doing what ancient cultures did in switching diets. Staying on any one diet will lead to problems, whether it be keto, carnivore, plant-based, vegetarian. I can make an argument, and the science supports it, that staying on one diet too long is not, it's not even good for your microbiome. We have to switch diets even just for our microbiome. So, my program is varying diet weekly, monthly, and even showing people seasonally. I'll be in ketosis, keto diet for a couple months. I'm a guy who gets bored anyway, and then I'm out. I'm doing another diet using, again, I still use feast famine cycling. So even if I'm in ketosis, I still take 1 or 2 days a week and feast on higher carbohydrates. So it reminds my body it's not starving, but I believe that if we emulate what our genes are set up to do, magic happens. Hormone optimization happens. We change our microbiome, which means now we're going to change our brain health, which means now we're going to change our immune system, which means diversity in the microbiome is linked to everything I just said. Better hormones, better brain, better immunity. So the question is, how do we create diversity, Ben? Do we create it by taking probiotic pills? Not so simple. We create it by a premise called hormesis. That means if we stress the microbiome, it gets more diverse. How do we stress it? Vary your diet. Change it weekly. Change it seasonally. It forces a stress and it has to adapt. And if you force adaptation, you get stronger, not weaker. Exercise is a stress. If you adapt, you get stronger. How do you adapt? Hormone optimization. So I teach classes on this because I get so frustrated in the medical community. I get so frustrated with doctors trying to force one diet, and it's not that simple. Not that simple.
So I've held off on too much science before now. If you could, uh, let's talk about and go deeper into the 5 R's that you've established of true cellular detox and healing. Could we walk through each of them and how we can think about applying them in our everyday lives?
Yeah. Okay. So 5 R's. What is the 5 R's? Let's start there. 5 R's is became a roadmap of what I teach to how we fix the cell. Okay. You can see I'm mixed up on my camera on what I think left and right is. I keep talking like this. It's
Well, we might
how
we
we
might
fix
we
the
might have
cell.
to we might have to change your diet. That's why.
Yeah, so we got to change something. But anyway,
Right.
how do we fix the cell? So I was doing a lecture. I think it was in California, and it was to doctors, and I'm explaining the 5 R's. Well, at that point, there was no 5 R's. I was explaining these principles that I'm going to explain in a moment, and I can tell they didn't get it. And I hope that I always think I'm a good communicator and a good teacher is one of my gifts. So I was on the airplane coming home very frustrated. And I was probably doing this because that's what I do when I'm very frustrated, because I knew I didn't connect. I knew it. I knew they didn't get it. I'm coming out of my skin with excitement, showing science around this. And by the way, all of which I discovered to get my own life back, right? Because my cells were not functioning correctly, which means I wasn't detoxing correctly, which means I was not hormonally correct, right? So I'm explaining to them, they missed it. And this is a true story. I literally prayed, and I'm a praying man, and I literally prayed out of frustration. And I'm telling you, this doesn't always happen. I wish it did. It started coming to me to the point where I would literally was like, I got to get a notepad, and I got a notepad like this. I started boom, 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 and the 5 R's was born. And there's so much more to it, because it was like things that I had learned when I was sick just came into this, this roadmap very clearly. All right. Our number one is remove the source. So if we don't remove the source, we're dead in the water. We kind of talked about that. I mentioned mold, I mentioned heavy metals, I mentioned environments, right? These different things. We have to evaluate our lives, and it can even be trapped emotions, right? If we have emotional traumas from our past, it drives cellular inflammation just like a toxin. So physical, chemical, or emotion are traumas, really in driving cellular inflammation. So we have to evaluate these, and I teach methods of how to do that. Okay, so let's move on. The other R's are more directly to the cell. R number two is we have to regenerate the membrane. I kind of just made the argument for that already. If we don't regenerate this cell membrane by getting rid of the bad fats and bringing in good fats, and granted, I've developed pretty amazing, cool products around this too, but we are not going to move good things in and bad things out. So detox is limited right there. We're not going to get the hormones to hear the message in the cell, and you're not going to feel well. Oh, by the way, these inner membranes in the mitochondrial membrane, you can't make normal energy if this membrane is oxidized and inflamed. So we have to regenerate them. R3 is we have to restore cell energy. Cell energy is how everything works. So there's something I'm sure you have, Ben, but have you heard of glutathione? Have you heard
No,
of it?
I have not.
Okay, glutathione is used in the cell to protect from overinflammation.
Hmm.
It downregulates oxidation, which ends up inflammation. But it also is how the cell, one of the ways how the cell gets rid of toxins. Okay. So as energy goes up, I'm going to write this down, a little formula. Okay. So as energy goes up,
Hmm.
glutathione goes up. Opposite is true. If energy drops, glutathione drops. So that means that they're inversely related. If we can't get enough cell energy going, glutathione drops. And therefore, then what happens? The cell becomes more toxic, doesn't it? And then if the cell becomes more toxic, we have more inflammation. See, these are all negative feedback loops, right? So we have to raise cell energy. Okay. Our number 4 is we have to reduce all of the inflammation in the cell. That's obvious to you because obviously we don't have normal membrane. We don't have normal membranes, but we don't have normal receptors either. Inflammation lowers lowers cell energy, so they're all interrelated. So we have to get rid of the inflammation. We have the diet strategies and other strategies to do that. The last one is R5. There's something called methylation, which is a simple carbon and 3 hydrogens. Doesn't matter, but these methyl groups, they also parallel glutathione, your ability to detox. So as methyl groups drop because they're being used up, and I'll say that in a minute how, so does the ability to get rid of toxins and inflammation. Oh, so does your ATP. So you see how all of these feed in. So gets rid of these methyl groups or depletes them. Emotional, physical, chemical stress. That's what depletes it. And if you deplete methylation, you deplete your cell's ability to detox. But also, methylation also means you trigger genes of susceptibility. So now all of a sudden, the thyroid condition that you maybe have an inheritance that you know susceptible to gets turned on. We call that epigenetics. So,
Hmm.
anyways, that's the 5 R's.
Okay. So I'm curious how you think about where you are in your journey. You've helped so many people improve their lives dramatically, Daniel, and there are more and bigger things that are there more and bigger things you're hoping to achieve from where you're at now and where you see the future?
When I was sick, um, I couldn't really see my way out of it at that time, and I think I was maybe even mad at God or who knows at that point, right? But my wife and her distress over my illness with 2 young kids, you can imagine, right? It's just as stressful on the spouse, or the loved one differently than it is for you. But in her, crying out to God, no doubt, she literally not heard an audible voice, but God spoke to her heart that not only I'm going to get him well, but I'm going to use him to take a message to the world. And when she would tell me that at that time, I didn't want to hear it. Trust me, because my exact comment to her was, I can't even get myself up, let alone take a message to the world. Here I am. So my wife was right. So um, I'm called to this until God tells me otherwise. So if you ask me, do I have more for it? Oh yeah, I'm going to bring this to as many people on this planet as I can. I started early on. Teaching seminars. Then I taught my own seminars, training doctors. Now, for the first time, I'm certifying coaches in this process, right? So I believe right now the powerhouse of healthcare is women. See, look, men train a lot of men. I'm not saying that, but women are responsible for the kids and the health of a family, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they seem to be driving towards being just wanting to help people because they own it. And so I've now started training coaches and certifying even coaches myself in the process. So that's new, with the goal of to reach more people, because doctors, they only have a certain network. But if you can train a lot of coaches, I'm going to train more of them than doctors. So that's new. I still teach seminars called Health Centers of the Future, and but now I'm bringing in these coaches. So someone interested in that, we can give a link. But my goal is to
Absolutely.
bring this to the world. It really is, directly and through practitioners and coaches of some sort.
So obviously, the name of the show is "I Own It." It's owning every aspect and being responsible for your whole life, which is something you adhere to and understand. Was there ever a point in your life you could look back where you said, "Man, I just don't own it. I don't know what I'm doing. I don't know what's going on here." I know you talked about your mercury poison. Were there any other times where you didn't own it?
Oh yeah. When I went through, I have a brain phase of my detox right at the cellular level. And that's really how I got my life back, right? And I did. My cellular energy came back. I was sleeping through the nights, and my hair stopped thinning. I mean, all these things happened, but I didn't know it. I I realized I was super mold sensitive. I would be normal, and I would walk into a building or something, and I would get brain fog as like the first symptom, and then a headache, and then for the next whatever days, I'd be just destroyed again. And in some ways, it scared the hell out of me more, because my biggest fear, remember, wasn't dying. My biggest fear was going back and having to go back through it again. Emotionally, I can tell you, I didn't own it. I would lose it. My wife would remind me, like, what? You're better now. And even as I was getting better, where I had like 3 months of like, oh my God, I feel normal, all of a sudden I'd have a bad day, because I was chemically sensitive. So my body, to defend itself, set up this hyper response. There's a place in your brain called the amygdala, primitive brain, and it sends signals to the hypothalamus, thalamus, and it almost, not an almost, it does, it creates this emergency reaction. And that's what was happening to me. I didn't own it. I was better, but I wasn't. Something was still broken. And I had to learn all about chemical sensitivity and how to fix it, how to tell the brain it's okay. And you don't have to go into that. We're working again. It's called a cellular danger response. And so I had to take the learning to another level. So there was, we don't have time for it, but there was probably several times where I didn't own it. But when I didn't own it, it drove me into the trying to own it, at least understanding more, which drove me into another lesson I needed to help what's happening today. So not owning it helped me own it to teach it. And if you teach it, you really own it.
Well, that was well said. I'm gonna have to use that. I like that. Well, what is the best way to engage and follow you so people can out there in the universe can follow you? You have a great program, great lessons. You do a deep dive on what really health means and how to stay healthy and what to avoid, what to include in your life to live a healthy life. How do people find out about this and follow you? What's the best way, Daniel?
Yeah. So I just did a webinar. One of the conferences I was just speaking at, and my son gave me a thing. The webinar would help because I really expand on this. It's like a free training, but so and it's uh, cellular. Gosh, now it's let me give you the other one that I know, and if I'll text him and see if I can come up with it. But Cellular Solutions. If you go to cellularsolutions.com, I'm at a loss. Well, let me send you to my website. How's that? I want to give you
All
the
right.
free thing there.
You know, I have a colleague of mine, Dr. Daniel Pompa. He could help you with your brain fog if you're struggling right now.
Actually,
Should
I
we
don't
should
set
we
these
should
things
we
up.
ring him right now and ask him?
No, no, yeah, you can ring me. I don't set these things up, so I
Okay.
probably don't even know
All
them.
right.
So um, I'll ask him. But anyway, but you can go to my website too. It's drpompa.com.
Okay.
Um,
Great.
Yeah, we'll see. But I want to get at least something more educational right away.
So while you're waiting for that, we're going to wrap up with our three questions. All right. So you're going to have to multitask.
Go ahead. I can do it.
All right. Here we go. So in our studio, and next time you have to come back in our studio, and you're going to have to come back on our show frequently. I mean, you are a wealth of knowledge, and I just love what you teach and what you know. And I'm big into health, and I'm always trying to improve my health. And I want to get into different topics with you next time we have you on. I'd love to have you if next time you're in Laguna Beach, you're more than welcome to come here. So if you
Yeah,
were in the
well, I would
studio,
love that in studio because I do. I come there a lot, and I feel like there's some topics that we could expand on, right? I mean, there's we kind of the first interview we gloss over, we hit a lot of like so much, right? But it almost opens up a can of worms where we could take each of these topics and just boom, diet variation. That's a whole show. Fasting is a whole show. I haven't even talked about extended fasting, for 5 days and how we utilize partial fast. I mean, there's just massive amounts of information here. So
so in the studio we have a couch. And if I laid you down on the couch, I said, Daniel, get on the couch, close your eyes, lay down. You're 44 years old.
no, no, me,
Yeah. How old are you?
57.
57. Okay. I thought you said 44. You look like you're 30. Yeah, unbelievable.
I see the
Whatever
gray hair, the gray hair.
whatever you're doing, keep doing it. And I like the recipe for it too, by the way. So if you're laying on the couch, your eyes are closed, you're 57 years old,
Uh-huh.
you go back and you could talk to your 16-year-old self and give yourself advice from all the knowledge you have, the experiences you went through, the hardships, the ups, the downs. What are you telling your 16-year-old self, giving yourself advice that you've learned to date that you can share with yourself?
Oh man, I mean, I would probably what I'm telling my 9-year-old right now, right? That um, in your adversities, if you choose, this kind of goes with your I own it, right? It's what do you do in the times where you don't own it? Because that will define what you own, how much you change the world, your levels of success, happiness. So, how do you react and respond when you don't own it to bring it to your language, right? When the bottom falls out in your life, how are we responding? What I've learned, my 16-year-old self, is the faster you change your perception of what's happening, because your perception becomes your reality, the faster you'll get to where God wants to take you, right? It's like the faster you'll end up in your purpose. And I believe God has a promise for all of us. The faster you'll end up in the promise. So when we don't own it, I believe it's our perception. The first thing we have to do is change our thoughts about this situation. And oftentimes it's hard to change the thoughts. So we have to change our language even before we believe it. So we have to be careful about how we're defining where we are in this low when we don't own something, when your life falls apart, right? Change your language first. And then if you change your language, your subconscious starts to hear you. And then what it will do is it will start to change the way you think about it. Now we're getting somewhere, because if we change our thoughts, according to a scientist that wrote a book called Biology of Belief, if we change our thoughts, we can actually lower cellular inflammation. But ultimately, literally, what he showed is our thoughts change our DNA. Our DNA changes the proteins that we make. And this is who we are. Your proteins is who you are. You literally you change who you are if we can change our thoughts. So when you don't own it, change our perception. Oftentimes we first have to change our language. And then here's another tip. I would tell my 16-year-old self that absolutely you have to hang around people that help you change your thoughts. You go to things that my son does, War Room, these places that are incredible, great thinkers, and you put yourself around those people and you think like them. And then your perception changes, your world changes. So, that would be my thoughts. And I have the link, by the
Outstanding.
way.
Yes.
So if they go to pompaprogram.com,
Okay.
There you go.
I love it. I'm definitely going to look at it after this show. Uh, Let me touch on what you said because I'm actually going through that right now. So one of my mentors slash consultants, he was educating me, said, we're going to change a few words that you use. And I said, well, what do I use all the time? He said, you like to use the word challenge because I know you don't want to say problem. I don't want you to say challenge anymore. We're not using it. It's out. I go, okay. He goes, we're all solutionary. I go, cool.
Mm-hmm.
Give me an example. He goes, when you have trouble meditating, because I meditate now 4 days, 4 times a day. I gotten into it. I love it. Just absolutely love it. He said, when you have to drop all your thoughts when you're meditating, I said, yes. I said, and so this actually happened yesterday, by the way. So we're talking on time here. And I said, yeah, it's a real challenge. He goes, no more. I go, what? He goes, what you're going to say is
Challenge.
you're going to double down to get better and eliminate thoughts when you meditate. Just that little tweak, he said, has a huge impact on your brain. And he always says to me, no gossiping, no complaining, because all that impacts your brain. And it touches on what you said. And so it really resonated with me because I'm like, I just had that conversation last night with him. And now you're talking about it. So thank you for sharing that.
Mm. The
Let's go to go
subconscious,
ahead.
yeah, the subconscious listens in on our words, right? And unfortunately, when we're younger, it works against us, right? Someone told you you were dumb. Someone told you you were fat. Someone told you you were ugly. Someone told, and unfortunately, that's a recording that goes on in our subconscious. And you might say, yeah, I, I don't think that I'm dumb, but the recording's there. And so, it's, controlling that. But we can change that recording by changing the words we speak. So even though there might not be the belief yet, it will be. So you have to be very careful about your words, very careful.
So it's our last day on earth, God forbid. Me and you, we're sitting down, we're having a meal together. What are we eating? It's your choice. And by the way, you can throw out we can have a pound of vegetable oil if we have to at that moment. We could do whatever we want. What are
Doesn't
we
matter.
eating? Yeah, what are we eating together?
Well, I'd still be a little careful, only because I don't want to be like this my last day. Oh, an hour later, be like, oh God, I have to spend torture. So I might have to be a little careful. But no, let's see. Let's have fun with it. I think. Okay, so I'm Italian by heritage, right? So there's something beautiful to me about a margarita pizza, right?
Oh,
Just simple sauce, cheese, beautiful, Neapolitan style.
mm-hmm.
Totally.
Okay.
There's something beautiful about a simple dish pasta, right? It's like, and again, in some form of moderation. Like when I eat pasta, I always use Italian grain because it's not sprayed with glyphosate. That glyphosate chemical is outlawed there. So that's why I only drink Italian wines too. We could do a whole show on wine. But
Mm.
the point is that, I will indulge in those periodically, right? I absolutely would think of those two foods. My favorite dessert, gelato. Simple.
Okay.
Vanilla gelato. I mean,
Mm.
that would absolutely be on that platter that you discussed.
And what are we washing this down with?
Good glass of wine. Absolutely. I would
So
wash it down with a,
Italian wine.
yeah, if we have access to anything, maybe it's a 2005 Cabochon, which is a sparkling wine. Frank Sinatra, one of his favorites. If you can get a 2005, then man, boy, that was special. Maybe it's a 2015 Barolo.
Nice.
Anyways, I love Italian wine, so it'd
I
definitely
do
be one.
too. I'm a big wino. When you get to know me, I love wine. I collect wine, so I love it and
Yeah.
love the stories behind it. So in our studio, you can see behind me partially we have musical instruments, drum sets, grand piano, 6 electric guitars, etc. And if you're in the studio with me, and you can have any musician or band, they could be living or deceased, play us a song, your choice. Who's coming in the studio and playing for us?
Okay, so um, I already mentioned Frank Sinatra, right? But that's not really a band. I'm going with Bruce Springsteen.
Okay. Cool.
Bruce Springsteen. I grew up with Springsteen because I had older sisters. I've been to probably 8 of his concerts. Growing up with Springsteen in the house and Sinatra, uh, I hear Sinatra on the background. To this day, Sinatra plays many of the days in the background because I grew up with it in the background, right? So, there's a piece when Sinatra is playing all day long in my home. That's good. So that's kind of my that's my comfort space music, right? But Springsteen, man, just rocks it out.
Did I assume it was all on vinyl you were listening
Oh
to
yeah,
when
I,
you were
I'm, the
younger?
matter of fact, what you hear right now is vinyl.
Oh,
Actually, my
okay.
wife and I
That's so
we
cool.
played another one. Yes, I
Yeah.
love vinyl. Yeah.
People in the audience might not know what vinyl is, but they could look it up and understand. That's how it was back in the day. Is you had, and then you had the little vinyls that you could do as well
Oh
and
yeah.
expand it so it would go on the. Yeah,
Remember,
we still have that.
remember 8 tracks? What a disaster,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
We'd be in our car like you try to get to the next song, right?
Right.
It's like, oh
Right.
gosh. And then when the cassettes came, it was like a breakthrough, man. It was
Right. Right.
technology breakthrough because you could actually fast forward, rewind with some accuracy and get more music on it, right? And then CDs, forget about it. How could it get better than that, right? How could it get easier than that?
Well, I just want to thank you for coming on today. What a wealth of knowledge. We'll definitely have you back on frequently. And thank you for sharing all your knowledge and experience with us and your and audience. If you're interested and like this episode, please click the like button. If you want to subscribe to the Ben Reinberg I Own It show, drop kick that right hand subscribe button below and love to have you. We have incredible guests that are forthcoming on the show as well as in the past so we can share knowledge with you. If you're interested in learning more about me, go to benreinberg.com. If you want to learn more about my company and commercial real estate, go to www.alliancecgc.com for all your commercial real estate needs. If you're interested in investing in our brand new fund, the Alliance Medical Property Fund, feel free to go on that site as well, and we can help you make money just like we do. So, Dr. Daniel Pompa, thank you very much for coming on the show. It was great seeing you, and look forward to having you on soon.
Thanks for having me, Ben. Can't wait to be on future show.
All right. Are we out? Okay.
We're clear.
All right. I want to hold on. I want to